Hey, welcome everybody out to our next Facebook Live number 2. This time I'm actually joined by Dr. Gabe Orichu.
I'm not busy, so I can actually be here.
Yeah, here in the office. And sorry, we're starting just a couple minutes late. I just got a little bit behind. And so today, actually, what we wanted to cover is the idea. We had a question sent to us kind of after our last Facebook Live that said, hey, we've been reading a lot of stuff about prebiotics, probiotics. Is there any way you guys can cover that in your next Facebook Live? And so we thought that was a great place to start. So we want to go over those kind of components and then open it up to any questions that anyone might have, as we love answering those questions as well. So we'll both be covering this. And there's a lot of stuff now about prebiotics, probiotics. I know the person in particular, they referenced actually Dr. Gundry's work, who's a doctor there out of California, if I remember right. California, and he's one that talks heavily about lectins and the lectin compounds found in foods. And so real quick, I just want to give a breakdown of what prebiotics and probiotics are. So I'm actually going to start with the probiotic side, or the idea of bacteria or gut bacteria. And this is a hot topic. You hear a lot of stuff about it now. There's a lot of products that have come out, both on the pre and probiotic side. As far as I'm aware, I think it started more on the probiotic end of it. I remember seeing a lot more of the bacteria, encapsulated bacterias, before I remember seeing anything kind of going heavy into the prebiotic idea. And so probiotics really just are bacteria. So our gut has, if I remember right, we actually have more bacteria in our gut than we do cells in our body. So that means we have
somewhere around there.
All right, yeah, somewhere right around there. So you're talking millions of different bacteria in the intestinal tract, and the majority of that actually resides in the large intestines, which is something that isn't really talked about much in this area of probiotics, which I think is interesting. So actually, you have to go through the stomach acids, and then small intestines, and the acidity of the small intestines before you will actually make it to the large intestines, which is where most of your bacteria actually does reside. And so there's lots of different kinds, there's lots of different strands. It is part of the process of the breakdown and assimilation of food, but it is, interestingly enough, part of the process of where we actually get some of our nutrients. So interestingly enough, some of our nutrients, especially your B vitamins, actually come as byproducts of those bacteria being fed. So as those bacteria get fed, there's things that they produce or they let out as a byproduct of function and operation, and that actually is our source of some of our vitamins and minerals, which is kind of neat. So that's what a probiotic is. That's when we use the term probiotic, we're talking about that bacteria that resides in the large intestines, and you do have some that reside in the small intestines. And the truth is that bacteria comes, or we have bacteria all around us. So everything that you can touch, you can feel, us, our own bodies, we actually do have bacteria that surround us or that reside on those surfaces. And so even the consumption of normal foods, especially your vegetables, fruits, things that, outside, which all foods kind of come from outside, will have some level of bacteria on them. So that's what bacteria is, or probiotics, and we'll get into that more in a second. And then you look at the other things just to define it, but what is prebiotics? Because I remember even myself when I started hearing this term from people, prebiotics, I actually didn't even know what it was. And so what prebiotics are the different, mostly fibers, but the different fibers and compounds that the bacteria actually need in order to thrive and to live off of. So it's kind of food for the bacteria. And so in a way, this becomes more important. So we're actually going to probably focus a little bit more on the prebiotics because our guts actually already have the bacteria in them, and there's different types, there's different amounts of the different types of bacteria. And so the key is what you feed those bacteria is going to determine what thrives and what doesn't thrive. And you want to keep a specific kind of balance there in the gut for good health. So therefore, what you feed it will make it thrive. And so actually your prebiotics are actually literally foods. I mean, they're mostly vegetables, fruits, those kind of things is where you get most of those prebiotics from. And so over the years, they have found specific compounds in those foods that are used more heavily by bacteria. Inulin is one of the most common ones I've heard of. But those are actually found in pretty sufficient amounts in the food that we're supposed to eat. And so I actually made a quick list just for reference, but things like garlic, onions, asparagus, bananas, apples, flax seeds, your seaweeds, your kelps, a little bit more unusual is your chicory root, dandelion greens, kale, spinach. All those actually are chock full of prebiotics, or the very compounds that your gut needs in order to develop the right kinds of bacteria. And so that's actually where all of that comes from. And so if those are in your diet, and actually in your diet in really good levels and good amounts, there's not as much of a crucial need to actually take a prebiotic as an actual supplement. Yeah, I don't know if we, not to just
No. Two other ones I want to throw out there.
Yeah.
Plantains, or actually three. Plantains, cassava or yucca, and sweet potato. Those are other three that are really, really good in the prebiotic sense. And the other thing that I was thinking of is an important question to ask is, what do you do when you had to take antibiotics? Because many of our patients have antibiotics. Now, we give herbs in our office that have antimicrobial properties, but they don't necessarily wreak the havoc that antibiotics do. Antibiotics will just go in there and destroy everything that's in their path. So we have lots of patients that will ask the question, should I take a probiotic to replenish that? Here's the thing with probiotics. The probiotics that Dr. Quinn was talking about are all the bacteria that are already living in you. So probiotics, when we talk about the product themselves, that's what's popular right now. Like people like Plexus, even doTERRA, you see them all over the place when you're going into the grocery store and the Whole Foods. Those ones typically only have a couple of strains in them. The most I've ever seen, I think, is like 20-something strains of bacteria. But we got to understand that you, like he was saying earlier, you have trillions of bacteria and thousands of species, thousands upon species. So when you are taking a probiotic, you're in a sense either giving yourself a Band-Aid, because most people, as soon as they stop taking the probiotic, the bloating and everything else comes back with a vengeance, or you're making an imbalance of itself. You're feeding a bacteria, or you're giving more and more of a specific type of bacteria, whether it's bifidobacterium or lactobacillus, two different types, two different species there. So if that ends up being the case, it's not going to help you in the long run. But what really is important, and this is something I harp on all the time with my patients, is eating the foods, not just the prebiotic foods, but the foods that will replenish your bacteria. Because we, like he just mentioned, we have bacteria that are all over us, which is one of the reasons why I don't use an antibacterial soap or hand sanitizer, is you're going to create an imbalance there and dysbiosis just of your skin. But also that we eat foods like fermented foods. Fermented foods, and I'm not talking about the pickles you're bringing off the shelf. Those are not fermented. If you go to the way your great-grandma used to make pickles, they were fermented. And you'll typically see those jars in a refrigerated section, because if they were out on the shelf, they would explode. Because the bacteria would be active, they would be creating bubbles or CO2, and then boom, it explodes. And anyone who is experienced with making kombucha probably has had an exploding jar too.
Yeah.
But that's a good way to get bacteria into your gut. And then also another one is eat local organic produce. If you grow it yourself, even better. Lightly rinse it. Don't go to town rinsing it with vinegar or anything like that. It's okay to eat some dirt now and again.
Yeah, yes, it is. And actually, yeah, perfect. Because actually, in like clinically in practice, those that have worked with me or we've talked about probiotics, I only carry a couple even on the shelf, and that's, he hit on the exact reason. Early on in practice, I tried that. I used actually quite different kinds. I used to carry multiple different ones, and I started just sending people to the grocery store to pick up the live fermented sauerkraut. Sauerkraut was the one I was most aware of in the beginning. And I'd actually have people just literally take like a bite a day is what I'd have them do. And the results I got from that for people actually outweighed the results I was getting from the probiotic capsules. And so early on, that kind of became my strategy. I realized some people, sauerkraut might not be their cup of tea exactly their want to or go to. So that might be an option. I also realized that sometimes you have things like convenience and you're traveling and those kind of things. So there are a couple that we do keep on the shelf. And my general recommendation, whether it's from us or not, is, as he mentioned earlier, would be to actually rotate. Because I haven't seen one in particular that seems to be like overly fantastic or do this amazing job. And because you have different strands and different types, you can kind of try to prevent that imbalance a little bit that can come about. And so if you are wanting to do a probiotic, would be the idea of try to actually rotate that probiotic and which brand you're using, which type you're using, and kind of rotate through it. And more so, and he said on that too, is the idea that, and actually let me back up, to give you a little bit more confidence, even in your own gut's ability to kind of take this on and to handle it. Several years ago, there's an article that came out. Forever we thought that the appendix doesn't do anything, is kind of what science said and medicine said. And so several years ago, an article came out showing that actually what it does do is it stores your natural bacteria. So it actually acts as a storage unit for some of the strands of bacteria that are particular to your gut. And so after anything like antibiotics, after anything like episodes of diarrhea, of vomiting, anything like food poisoning, that stuff where the body just has to expel everything, that's actually when that appendix kicks in, kind of releases those bacteria strands, and then you're trying to actually work to redevelop your bacteria strands, which is actually why, like, post those events, it becomes really sensitive a lot of times in terms of what you can eat and can't eat. Is that you're actually going through a rebuilding process. So you kind of go back to this idea of, cool, we need to make sure we're kind of supporting that, helping it, looking at the fermented foods, looking at the again, natural, local, like kind of more live foods, as well as some of those lists of, which you mentioned earlier, some of those prebiotics, because they'll give you the right compounds and the right things to like set the stage to help develop your own gut bacteria. And so, but yes, and so because the idea of probiotics is crucial. There's a lot of research out there that shows the improvement of administering probiotics post antibiotics and some of the benefits that come from that. And so what we're saying is simply you can get that same result by going after it from a food standpoint.
I think one of the other important things, and this is the thing you're going to run into constantly, there is no quick fix. Period. Mm-hmm. And that's essentially what we're trying to do with probiotic in the capsule sense. We're trying to have a quick fix, get over it. I have many friends that use them, but they continue to eat diets and things like that that are counterproductive to their goals. Mm-hmm. Now, there are certain things that you can do to make certain foods more healthy, like with wheat. If you can handle wheat and gluten, you can actually make sourdough. Me and my wife do that. We actually are able to eat it. We don't eat it too often, but we will make sure we ferment and sour our own dough with natural leavening. There's a ton of different ways to get these things into your diet, but the biggest thing is it takes work. It takes time. If you had a round of antibiotics, it'll take up to a year to replenish your gut. And that's if you're really, really careful about what you're putting into it. Because as soon as you're like, oh, I'm going to have a cheat day and eat a bunch of ice cream, you just ruined your gut and totally exponentially fed a bunch of different bacteria. I'm not saying you can't enjoy your ice cream or enjoy some time with dessert or anything like that. We should all enjoy life, but just understand it takes a lot of time. And one of my favorite things that I think is true, and everyone has heard this, you are what you eat. Mm-hmm. This is true. But one of the other things I saw from some of the farmers that I like here locally was you are what your meat eats. We often do not consider where our meat is coming from, not to mention how many people are out there and don't realize what chicken really looks like and how it's slaughtered. It's an interesting world we live in, and our food quality is what should be on the top of our list of priorities.
Yeah. Probably the last thing I'll hit on, because that's exactly perfect leadway, is that interesting enough, the probiotic, what we call the gut biome, as a lot of people would call it, it actually is so crucial that it does determine, as you mentioned earlier, nutrients. There's a connection in terms of stuff that comes in and how it affects the brain. So there's a huge connection in certain conditions where they talk about like your autisms, your brain-based conditions where you're actually looking at from the gut and what's going up. And interestingly enough, it's like it's really just the end result. Like a lot of people commonly talk about perfect. We actually just got a first timer. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us there from Centerton. And so it's actually end result. One thing that people come in a lot of times talking about is candida. That's a really common thing to talk about in the holistic fields is, hey, I think I have a candida infection. Well, the interesting thing about candida, and this is just as an example, is it actually is supposed to be in our gut. It is a bacteria that resides there, or sorry, fungus. The fungus that resides there, it helps in the processing and breakdown of sugars and of simple carbohydrates. And so it's supposed to reside there. The problem is when it becomes too prominent. So if you don't have it, you also run into an issue with your sugar processing, and everything has sugar in it. So literally when people come in and say, hey, I think I have a candida issue, it's like, well, what are you eating? So if you're eating a ton of simple carbohydrates and a ton of sugar, well, the answer is yes, you do, because that's what you're feeding. That's what's actually developing, and that's what's growing. Candida overgrowth can be horrific though, and it can be. Candida overgrowth can be absolutely horrific. So it will manifest like your other fungal type infections, which comes with brain fog, which comes with low energy, which comes with tons of different stuff. Joint swelling, joint pains, because it actually will start to spread. Well, again, it actually came from yourself. It came from your own gut biome and this collection of things that exist there. And so it's which ones we feed is which ones develop, and then that's actually what ends to some of the interim scenarios or symptoms that people experience.
One thing off of that,
yeah.
I think one of the issues that we've had for a long time, and it's all based in the germ theory. The germ theory was definitely a modern day wonderful discovery that these things exist. But from that, we started eradicating as best as possible. That's where your hand sanitizers come in. That's where your antibacterial soap comes in. And I'm glad we're talking your language.
Yeah, perfect.
But that's where all these things come in, and we're trying to constantly eradicate them when in reality, we are supposed to have a symbiotic relationship. One of the things we treat commonly here is Lyme, and that's actually one of the ideas out there is that some of these bacteria that these ticks are carrying, we're not going to get into any of the more controversial stuff with it, but some of it, including also the Epstein-Barr virus, is a question of, are we supposed to be living symbiotically with it? One of the more common infections that we see today in the medical world is Streptococcus aureus, staph Staphylococcus aureus, staph infection. You're supposed to have staph on you.
Yes.
It lives with you.
Yes.
And so it's a symbiotic relationship that matters. And so if we're constantly trying to kill these things off, we create a playing ground. And it's just, it is a war on your skin, in your stomach, in your mouth, in your guts, wherever. And if you're constantly being exposed to antibacterial substances, it's going to do you way more harm than good. And we have to be very careful when it comes to that.
So I do want to open it up. It's all about balance. It's exactly what it is, all about balance. I do want to open it up. We still got another about 10, 15 minutes. If any questions about this subject matter, pre and post, or probiotics, or really any other health matter in general, is it possible to do an appendix cleanse of some sort?
So an appendix cleanse would kind of go along with any type of other gut cleansing type things. So we would look at your diet, of course. We want to make sure you're not got any type of food intolerance that's working against you, creating inflammation. But then we would also use different herbs that might help eradicate either a bad bug, like a pathogen that's causing a problem, or to correct an imbalance. And that would typically take care of the appendix as well. We typically don't do a lot of cleanses, mainly because the herbs that we have detox as well as remove pathogenic microbes and things like that. So if you ever see us talk about detoxing, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about like some big gallon jar filled with lemon water and other things to help cleanse the liver. your body's usually capable of healing itself. One of the famous things from the chiropractic world is the power that made the body heals the body, and we are big believers in that.
Yeah. And to go with that appendix thing, because from a structural standpoint, so that's what we'll do chemically, that eradication, and plus the herbal component. From a structural standpoint on the appendix, there's a couple things that happen. There is a valve, it's called Ileocecal valve, which is right between the small intestines and the large intestines. And interesting enough, that appendix sits right around that valve. I don't have a diagram for it, but if that valve gets stuck, and that valve is actually pH dependent, it's dependent upon the acidity levels in the gut. If that valve gets stuck, it will actually back up bowel material and let it sit on that appendix. And that will be what I've seen over the years, the most common cause of appendix irritation. And so the reason that pH valve will get off has everything to do with what Dr. Gabe just talked about in terms of microbes, in terms of diet, in terms of inflammation levels, and how the gut's actually moving. But sometimes in addition to that, there can be kind of a helpful structural correction that we can do, a release there that will get that moving and kind of speed up the process of calming the appendix down, which sometimes can be super crucial depending on timing, obviously, as it's happening if someone's actually having an actual appendix, inflammatory issue. Should we detox with black walnut? So cool. Hopefully I answered that question. Should we detox with black walnut and cloves periodically? So what you're looking at with black walnut and cloves, for that matter, both two great, if I can call them herbs, cloves are herbs, but both two good things that we actually will use or have sometimes I've used in the past. And you're looking at both those actually being really quite good prebiotics is really the idea behind both those, especially the black walnut.
And the cloves are antibiotic in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and the cloves are antibiotic in a lot of ways. Yeah, so the cloves antibiotic, black walnut being prebiotic. And so what you're doing there, making sure you're killing off bad bacteria with the cloves, and then the black walnut being the prebiotic it's actually feeding the right stuff to kind of help things move through the digestive tract faster. So in terms of the term detox, I kind of have this love-hate relationship with that term. That is a great concept. It's that to eradicate and get rid of things. I do think, because you said periodically myself, it took me a long time to figure this out because I used to be just like, my body works perfect, and I'll get myself back to normal, and then the next thing I know, several months later, I was feeling off again, and I get myself back to normal, and I finally just accepted, like, I have to do like a probably every 2 to 3 months at least kind of system, and depending on how I'm feeling, sometimes I'll do it way more often than that, and so I pretty much go now, kind of getting checked for different types of herbs, what to take, kind of doing a detox or eradication. And then, having a period of time, maybe it's several weeks where I'm not, and then I'll go back and get checked again by Dr. Gabe, do it again. And so I have seen over the years, and I've encouraged that my clients to do periodic checkups, herbal kind of cleanses, and to be on that for a period of time. So do I like the idea of a periodic idea? Absolutely. If we can fit it into our schedule, and you'll only see more and more improvement over the months and years of doing something like that. Anyone that's worked with us for long periods of time will say the same thing. And I will say actually the same thing. Like, I feel better now at my age of 32 than I actually did back in my early 20s, which is kind of an amazing thing to be able to say, right? 20s is you're like, woo, but I do. There's a lot of my health concerns and problems I actually had back then that now I don't have, and I feel like I have more energy, and there's other things to it. So thank you for that.
And then what about if you have fibromyalgia and dispersive inflammation? So if somebody comes in with fibromyalgia, I'm thinking of one of a few things. One, I'm thinking nightshade toxicity. Nightshades are some of the worst when it comes to joint pain and muscle pain. So I'm already thinking of that. I'm thinking of Lyme and Lyme-related issues because they cause a lot of pain. And then lastly, autoimmunity. Especially with the spurts of inflammation, of course, you're going to want to think of autoimmune disorders. So we got to figure out what's causing that. What's the root cause? Is it nightshades? Is it gluten? Is it some type of bacterial issue? Is it heavy metals? Or is it all of the above? We have to figure that out. And something that me and Dr. Quinn have often talked about is if you imagine a jar, and that jar is the amount of inflammation that you can even handle. And once it hits the threshold, that's when everything just goes to heck. And so we try to take away whatever causes the most of that inflammation. Maybe gluten is a big chunk, and we remove gluten, and you feel a whole lot better because it removes that place away from the threshold. So we're trying to do that as much as possible so that your body can handle things as they come in. The hardest thing about living in today's world is we're constantly bombarded with toxins and other issues, whether it's just stress from modern day lifestyle or whatever. And so that's what we're trying to figure out. And so if we can do that and also give you something in the meantime, whether it's like deer antler, velvet, or CBD or something like that to kind of help stem that inflammation down. We also love mangista and Japanese knotweed for resveratrol to knock down that inflammation, get you where you need to be, and handle it until we can eradicate the problem as much as possible.
Yeah, we'll get some other comments there because there's a talk about plant-based products, which we've been mentioning throughout the process in terms of the herbs we use. Which that's actually one of the things I love about herbs in that field is they actually are foods. So like herbs, for the most part, many of them are spices or things that people actually can consume. I actually make that comment to my clients a lot of times, like, if you want it to be 100% from your diet, that's fine and that's fantastic. So then let's figure out how to get you more of these herbs into what you're cooking and what you're doing. So that always technically is a possibility for people. Indian food. Love it. And in fact, if you go across the world, this is kind of a theory of mine, but if you go across the world, what makes foods is, Thai food versus Indian food versus Asian food is actually the herbs that they use. Technically, it's still the base foods. It's chicken, it's rice. I mean, the food itself, its broth, stays the same. What actually makes it that way are the spices. And when you look at the components or the capacity of spices of antibacterial, antiviral, antifungal, antiparasitical, you start to get an idea of why the people have the health things and the stuff that they do and how that all kind of comes together. So in the American diet in particular, and in the way that salt and pepper, the way we kind of eat here in general, is we're really quite deficient in the herbal side of the food pyramid. Maybe I should create a new food pyramid, herbs, right? The herbal side of the food pyramid, because they're also highest nutritional value, vitamins and minerals come from that herb component too, or those spices. And so plant-based, absolutely. And we see amazing results from doing that side of it. God's natural garden heals us. There was one more question about COPD, and this will probably be actually the last one that we handle, and then we'll actually have to call it done. And like I said, we're going to actually start doing these every Wednesday at noon is going to be the time we're going to do it. We're going to run them for, again, about 30 to 40 minutes. We'll always have kind of a subject that we start with, but we love to have, open it up for questions and any questions that people have.
And if you have anything that you want us to go over, just either shoot us a message, whatever, comment on here. We'll write it down and we'll make sure we cover it.
We try to we get to it. Not to put him on the spot, but I actually won't be in town next Wednesday. And so I don't know if he wants to tackle that himself. Okay, cool. So we will have it next Wednesday at noon as well, and we'll start it going forward just Wednesdays at noon. So what would be a great protocol for COPD? Okay. So
I think you really have to look at the cause, whether it's coming from long history of cigarette use or something like that, or if it's coming from a long history of inflammation like bronchitis or things like that. That'd be the important first step.
Yes, important first step. In order to calm that down. In general, so I can give, and I'm always hesitant, I don't have an issue giving kind of my protocols that we've found over the years to be beneficial for people. One of the things we do in our office, as Dr. Gabe just inferred, is try to find the root cause. And so we do that through, in our case, we do a heavy amount of what's called muscle testing or neurofeedback testing to try to identify what that root cause is. Sometimes that does involve blood work and those things too. In terms of anything lung related, particularly something like COPD, we have two different herbs that I use really heavily for that. One is called camu camu. Anything, lung, seasonal allergy, that kind of stuff. I've seen really great results with that. Another one is called Vital Guard, which is chrysanthemum is what it is. So the two of those become, and then a vitamin D, those three components kind of become like a base for me in anything lung related. So I think that's probably about the most I can probably give you on that would be those 3 type of herbs.
And it's really difficult for us to give any type of protocol because every single person that comes in gets an individualized protocol for them. So we don't have one set protocol. Everyone will have something different. Doesn't matter if they come in with the same issue. Everyone's different.
Yes. I got one more quick second. So I actually did mention just briefly the sinus and allergy thing. That's again I mentioned that just right there. The Camu, Vitamin D, Battle Guard or Chrysanthemum is my base component of the sinuses. I've seen it help people a lot with seasonal allergies, a whole lot, just that Camu alone. That being said,
I'll hit on sinus a whole lot more next week.
We'll hit on it. Well, actually, we'll probably what we'll target next week and tackle that next time.
And the essential oil question.
And essential oil
That's always a fun one.
Yeah, so we'll hit that. We'll probably hit that next week. Again, to comment on that though, is that simply as he's inferring, there's certain things I found that will help calm the initial symptoms down. So like you don't want to be stuffed up. You don't want to have all this stuff coming out. So we can get you going on something to calm that down. But that is actually only going to take us so far, which goes back to like why you have to find the original root cause. So like we can get the results from that. And if you want to just take that over and over and continue taking that, then that's an option. But until we can get back, and that's something about sinuses in particular, you got something driving inflammation there. So cool. Thank you so much everybody for joining us. We really appreciate this a lot. We'll be back again next Wednesday at noon, running about the same time frame, and hope you guys see you guys back then. So.
Yeah, and one last thing, if you do have any other comments, I'll try to keep an eye on this video and make sure that I write down any of the questions or things that you want me to go over next time.
Cool. Thank you.